Welcome to this quick little video. Well, it might actually not be a very quick little video, actually. This video, we're going to build all 15 of the major scales, and this is going to be kind of a companion to the stuff that you need to know, the first video in that series, major scales. So as you can see, I've got a place where we're going to write our key signature here. I've got spaces where we're going to write the 7 notes. Those 7 notes are numbered as scale degrees. There are 7 scale degrees because there are 7 notes. And I've also got the solfege for each of those scale degrees written below. So you'll be able to see the 3 components that go into thinking about scales. Thinking about scales as a group of notes, as a pattern of numbers, and as a pattern of syllables, the solfege. So we're going to start with the key of C. The key of C is the first C. We might actually go around the circle of fifths just to keep things orderly in some way. So, and if you don't know what the circle of fifths, don't worry about that. It's just a thing that we're going to use. We're going to go through all 15 of the major scales here, and I'll try and put timestamps in the timeline for each of these. Okay, so the key of C major. The first note that we have in the key of C major is C. And if you know anything about the key of C major, you know that it is all of the natural notes. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B. That is the C major scale. And the pattern, of course, that we're following for the C major scale, never forget the pattern of the major scale in general. The pattern is whole step, half step, whole step, half step. So C major is the perfect scale to see that pattern in because it's just the white keys on the keyboard, if you're familiar with the keyboard, and you should be. So from C to D, we know that that's a whole step because in between them, there is a black note that is a sharp and a flat. So I'm just going to write a little dash here, indicating an accidental, a sharp or flat note, a black key on the keyboard. And there's also one between D and E. There's also one between F and G, G and A and B. So there is no black note. There's no sharps or flats between E and F and B and C. Of course, after B, the circle of the musical alphabet goes around and around. After B comes C again. There's no black note between those. So everywhere where there's a black key between 2 white keys, that is a whole step. And it's a little bit harder to see that in all of the other keys where we have black notes in the scales. But keep this in mind. Keep the major scale formula in mind because it is always the same. The formula never changes. That's how we get the major scale, is through the formula. Okay, next one. Right, so G, the first note in the G major scale is G. Then, after that comes A, whole step. Another whole step is B, C, D, E, F sharp. So there's our G major scale. All right, so the key of D. Obviously, the first note in any key is going to be the note that the key is named after. So the key of D, we start with the note D. A whole step up from D is E, and then F sharp. We still have F sharp left over from G major, which was the last key around the circle of fifths. D is the second sharp key. There's 2 sharps in it. So we still retain the same F sharp from G major. This is a pattern that will continue through every single sharp scale that we go through, and you'll see that. F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp. Another pattern to notice here is that in the key of G just before, F was the 7th note, and that note was sharped. Okay, this key, C, is the 7th note, and now it's sharped as well. You can see there's a pattern developing there. That pattern will continue throughout all of the sharp keys, all 7 of the sharp keys, all the way up to C sharp. The seventh note will always be sharp from the previous key around the circle of fifths. You'll see what I mean if that's confusing at all. But just watch every single time we add the 7th note here, it will always be sharped. Okay, the key of A major now. A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp. Now the key of E starts with E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, guess what? D sharp. Now, here's kind of a trick about learning scales and memorizing them. Learning and memorizing scales has a lot to do with memorizing how many sharps or how many flats exist within that scale. That's one of the reasons why the circle of fifths is so useful, is because it lays out all of the keys on a circle, and you can see exactly the key signature and how many sharps, how many flats are in that key. Yeah. So the circle of fifths is a helpful tool for that reason, because every single key is different. Every single key has a different group of notes. And the enharmonic keys, which we'll get to in just a few here, are a little bit different than that, slightly different. They're enharmonic because they're both sharp and flat at the same time. Actually, we'll get to that. But the circle of fifths also lays that out very clearly. Hopefully it's just really helpful to see and to realize that every single scale is not completely different from each other. Every single scale is only one note different from the one before it. So if you can keep track of those sharps, and when we get to the flat keys, when you can keep track of the flats, that's a really helpful tool. Anyway, on to the next major scale. Okay, the key of B major. Now, if you're keeping track, this is now the 5th sharp scale. We have B, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp. All right, now this is the first key that we've seen where the key, the root note of the key, is a non-natural note. It's an accidental, it's a sharp note. This is the case for actually most of the flat keys. Most of the flat keys begin on a flat note. This is the first sharp key that begins on a sharp note. So the first note is F sharp. And then we have G sharp, A sharp, B. B is now the only natural note left in the major scale. C sharp, D sharp, E sharp. Yes, you are not reading that wrong. E sharp. E sharp is a white key on the keyboard, actually. It's the key that we normally would call F. But the rules of the major scale are that you have to have every single letter, all 7 of them, from the musical alphabet. You can't repeat any letters from the musical alphabet. For instance, you can't have two Fs in the F sharp major scale, even though E sharp is the same key as F on the piano keyboard. Since we can't repeat any notes, we have to name that note F. We have to name the key F, the note name E sharp. So yes, we can't repeat any notes. We can't omit any notes. We have to have all of them. We can't have more than one of each of them. So the rules of the major scale are very strict, and you have to follow them very carefully. Otherwise, it ruins everything that you use the scale for. Anyway, there's F sharp. Next up, we have our very last sharp scale, the C sharp major scale. Let's go to that one. The C sharp major scale is the kind of the polar opposite of the C natural major scale. In the C major scale, every single note is natural. And in the C sharp major scale, every single note is sharp. So, C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp. Just like in the key of F sharp major, E sharp is played with the same key on the piano keyboard as the note F, but it has to be named as E sharp. The note name is E sharp in that scale. Same goes for B sharp in this scale. B sharp on the piano keyboard is normally the key that we use to play the note C, but again, the same goes for the key of C sharp. We already have a C in the scale, so we can't have another one, even though that's the same key on the keyboard as C. And we can't leave out B, so we have to call this final seventh note in the key of C sharp B sharp, even though it is the same key as C natural on the keyboard. All right, there's all of our sharp scales. Let's go to the flat scales now. Okay, this is the first flat key, the key of F major. This is the only flat key with a natural note as the root. So here, we'll see that coming up, actually. So now, F is our root note, G, A, the fourth note, B flat, is now the first flat note in the flat keys, F major. Right, so B flat, C, D, E. Right, so it was the seventh note that was sharpened for every single sharp key. For the flat keys, it's the fourth note is flattened. And we'll see that continue as we continue to go through these flat keys. Not only is the fourth note flattened, but this will actually also be the root note of the next key. All right, the key of B flat, we have B flat, C, D, here's that fourth note now, E flat. This is the new flat note in this key, F, G, A. All right, next, the key of E flat. We have E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D. There's one thing that I want to say now that we're talking about flat keys and the major scale in general. Across all major keys, whether it's the C natural major key or any of the sharp or flat keys, is the seventh note is always one half step or one semitone below the root note of the key. There's only one half step between D and E flat. When you think about the C major scale, there's only one half step between B and C, the seventh and the first note. That always will remain true. And if you are thinking about the major keys, and you're trying to remember, these little tricks, like the sharp keys, the 7th note is always sharped. The flat keys, the 4th note is always flattened. If you get that backwards in your head, you can always remember that the 7th note always has to be a half step below or a half step apart from the 1st note when it revolves back around the circle. So if you accidentally flat the 7th note, thinking that that's how the flat scales work, it's not actually how the flat scales work. It's the 4th note that is flattened. And if you flatten the 7th note, it will actually create 2 half steps or a whole step between the 7th note and the root note. And that actually creates a different kind of scale, a scale that we're not going to talk about probably ever on this channel. That's the Mixolydian mode. But yeah, it's a kind of major key, but it is not the major key. So be careful of that, and always remember that the 7th note is 1 half step below the root note. Alrighty, here we go. Next key. All right, the key of A flat. We begin A flat, B flat, C, D flat, this is the new flat, E flat, F, G. Okay, so we have to talk about something with the D flat major scale. There are 3 scales at the bottom of the circle of fifths that are what we call the enharmonic keys. So these last 3 keys are going to be those enharmonic keys, and I will also list which key it is enharmonic with. Since this note D flat can be named either D flat or C sharp, we already know that there's a C sharp major scale, and it's going to actually have all of the exact same tones as the D flat major scale in equal temperament tuning, that is. And if you played them on the piano, if you played them on any instrument, the D flat major scale is exactly the same in terms of how you play it as the C sharp major scale. So I'm just going to put that right here. I'm just going to write EH for enharmonic. So this is enharmonic with C sharp. Either way, we have to talk about the D flat major scale. We need to write it out. D flat, E flat, F, G flat is our new flat in this key, A flat, B flat, and C. All right, the G flat major scale, enharmonic with the F sharp major scale. Here we go. G flat, A flat, B flat, C flat. Now we have C flat in our scale, D flat, E flat, F. Now, the final major scale, the key of C flat. All of the notes in this scale are going to be flat. And they have to be, because it's kind of the polar opposite of the key of C, where all of the notes are natural. So here we go. This is going to be easy. C flat, D flat, E flat, F flat, and G flat, A flat, B flat. Finally, we have a flat note as our 7th note of a flat major scale. And that is, again, because, well, it can actually happen for this one, because think about our root note, C flat. This is enharmonic with the note B, right? Enharmonic with the note B. That means the key on the keyboard that you normally use to play the note B is now being used to play the note C flat in the key of C flat. So B has to be flat, and B flat is 1/2 step below the key, which is B normally. Remember, enharmonically, B flat is also the same as A sharp. From A sharp to B, 7 to 1 is a 1/2 step. So from B flat to C flat is also a 1/2 step. Just like from B natural to C natural is a 1/2 step. When you flatten both of those notes, you flatten them by the same exact amount. So the interval between them isn't changing. It's still a 1/2 step from B flat to C flat. To close this out, know your major scales. Get to know them really well. And try to get to know everything about them that you can. One thing I'd like to show in this video is just a couple of handouts I have here that might be helpful as we go through these major scales in this video. Thinking about the major scale as notes, thinking about the major scale as intervals, as solfege, as scale degrees, as as chords, as root notes, as whatever. There's lots of different ways to think about scales. But here's a couple of things that I've got that are kind of just helpful to have as you are learning your major scales. I think solfege is probably the most important tool for any musician to have in their back pocket, especially for the major scale. If you know solfege, if you can sing solfege, if your ear has developed and you've trained your ear to be able to hear when fa, when la, when sol, when do, when any note happens, if you can hear that, that's a immensely powerful tool. I think it's kind of just essential for any musician to be able to listen to a piece of music, to listen to especially a worship song, and to be able to know that's the 1 chord, that's the 4 chord, that's the 5 chord. Solfege is invaluable, and if you're going to spend your time learning one thing more than anything else, I'd say it should be solfege. The major scale is just these ones right here in the middle. These other hand symbols and other syllables are reserved for modes and harmonic scales and melodic scales and basically any other kind of scale that isn't the major scale. So you only have to worry about these ones right here, but I think you should worry about them. I think you should worry a lot about them. You should spend a lot of time learning your major scale solfege. It applies to all the major scales. And if you learn that as a singer, for instance, or as a guitar player, or anybody, even as a drummer, as a percussionist, as a synthesizer player, if the only thing you learn about the major scale is the solfege, I think that's probably better than anything else, better than learning any one thing else. Solfege, super important. Also helpful to keep in mind, I think, the musical alphabet in general. I don't know if I invented this or if I got it from somewhere else. I can't remember exactly. But the musical alphabet is, it's just taking the notes, and instead of them being in a straight line on a piano keyboard like this, they're together in a circle. They join together. And it's just helpful to see the intervals in the musical alphabet between each note in a scale. One thing that I love to do with the musical alphabet handout that I use with my students is I put it in a page protector, and I can just take a dry erase marker and just write on the page protector and erase it and not have to worry about printing out 15 different musical alphabets for all the 15 different scales, or if I'm teaching a minor scale or something like that. You could do the same thing. You could create the musical alphabet. You could write it out. You could print it out. You could do whatever, and just put it in a page protector and practice your major keys. If you're thinking, if you're learning a song and you want to learn the scale for that song, it's a new scale you haven't learned before. Say D flat or something like that. Well, you know the major scale pattern: whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. You can see D flats right there: whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, and there's your D flat major scale. And yeah, so musical alphabet is a really helpful tool. Also helpful for intervals when you're thinking about intervals as well. Lastly, probably least important for worship music is actually learning classical notation. This is great for hymns. Actually, probably essential for hymns. Just like solfege is essential for hymns. Just a week or two ago, I was sight reading out of a hymn for the first time in a very long time, a couple years. I used solfege. I sang the bass part. I got through just fine. So knowing your key signature, very helpful, because it helps you visualize the major scales in a different way, helps you visualize music in a different way, and forces you to kind of rely on solfege a lot, especially. Anyway, there's just a couple of extra things. This is a really long video, so I'm not worried about it being too long or too short or anything about that. This is just the way that this video is. It takes a long time to learn your major scales, and maybe the hour or so that this video is turning out to be, maybe that's proof of that. Anyway.